What does nature have to do with mindfulness practice? Well, if you've been following on this podcast for a while, you know that I tend to start these outside in nature. It's part of connecting, how we connect with what is around us, what is within us, and there's a lot more to it than that. Welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. My name is Ted Meissner, and today we are going to be exploring the connection between mindfulness practice and nature with our friend George Kinder. Please do remember to like and subscribe if you're getting something out of these podcast episodes, and let's begin. Our guest today is George Kinder. George, welcome. Good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ted. Great to be here.
So I'm wondering if you could just introduce yourself briefly to the audience. And I know it can be can be difficult to condense a lifetime into just a few moments, but maybe you could say just a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been practicing for most of my 76 years. I've been a Buddhist teacher for almost 40 years, teaching in Hawaii and in Massachusetts, in Europe. Led many week-long retreats over that period of time. The My spiritual practice goes back all the way to birth, as Ted and I were talking earlier, and I've got stories from that, but I think that's not the theme here. I In college, Ram Dass's Be Here Now really impacted me. He was into Hinduism primarily then, and the book that he threw at me was Ramakrishna, Gospel is Sri Ramakrishna, but Ramakrishna's work was about all traditions. And so I did that, and then I went to Bari at some point after 15 or 16 years of concentration, samadhi-like meditation. I went to Bari for a number of retreats, did a 3-month retreat. I started teaching around 1986, I think, and I've been really dedicated to present moment mindfulness practice. I loved the early period of samadhi and concentration, but boy, there ain't nothing like being in the present moment, waking up. And so that's really been the primary theme. I've always identified as an artist as well as a spiritual figure, but I had to make a living. So most people know me. If you Google me, you'll find out that I was in the financial world. And I've trained thousands of advisors in mindfulness, really, among other things, all over the world. So that married, 2 kids, have a great life. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that overview. And again, I know it can be challenging when there are so many different aspects
Yeah.
to the tapestry of someone's life. So thank you for that. And interestingly, one of the podcast episodes we recently had was with Ann Speckens and Stephen Batchelor about art and mindfulness. And this is in that same territory. One of the things we're going to be talking about today is a series of books, reflections on spectacle ponds. So George, I'm wondering if you could just say what that is and how you got started putting that together.
Yeah. So I'd been, doing tax returns for a living and then doing some financial work, always meditating multiple hours a day. And then I found my way. I always wanted to live in the country, and I found my way out here. I'm not far from where Ted is in Massachusetts, and it's kind of rural. And what I found was a spit of land that went out into what we call in Massachusetts a pond, but in Texas they'd call it a lake. It's 80 acres, and it's just 10 miles from Walden Pond. I'd read Thoreau's book many times, dog-eared. I lost it in a flood a number of years later. But I got here and I was so stunned. I thought I'd arrived at paradise. It was just so beautiful. And I went out and bought my first camera since I was a boy. And I decided that what I wanted to do was to capture the essence of every single day of the year in photograph and in poetry, mostly influenced by Zen poetry, mindfulness poetry, nature poetry. And that's what I did. So I've got a 5-book series. One is a weekly 2-page spread of every week of the year with images from my photographs and then poems, hopefully inspiring poems to live in nature and to live in the present moment. And then 4 books of one for each season, going through each day of the year. So that's really what it is. And boy, we could talk about art forever if you want to talk about it. Oh, I want to say one thing about nature while we're on it, because I know you're so into nature. Look at the image behind you. It's so much like Spectacle Pond. And the nature is really our first teacher of mindfulness. It really, and the present moment, you can't escape it. You walk out the door, and you've been enclosed in this frame that keeps everything kind of limited. And you walk out, and suddenly your senses are alive, and they change every moment. It's our first teacher of mindfulness. It's not as deep, and it's not as disciplined as the sitting practice. I approach this practice of walking out this spit of land to my meditation cabin every day. And I approached it as a 6-hour journey from roughly 6 a.m. to noon, where I dedicated myself to practice and poetry and photography during that entire time. And then my work life, so I could make a living, was afternoon. Yeah, so that gives you a flavor, I think, of the trek. Yeah.
It does, and George, this is so interesting because so many people in my classes, I'm sure in yours and other teachers that I know, when asking people when do you feel just naturally on your own most present, it's often out in nature, when taking
Right.
walks and being outside. And so finding that this can be an integrated part of someone's practice can be really, really validating and really uplifting for those who may be doing that anyway. So, as you were putting your books together, when you first started, were there any surprises or new learnings that came about while you were taking photographs and doing your meditation practice?
Well, I have to also say that I'm Spectacle Pond is in Littleton, Massachusetts. I mentioned my earlier practice with coming out of Hinduism, concentration practices, samadhi practices. Well, I lived in Littleton before. I'd gone back to Cambridge, and that's where I had my business. But right after college, I came out to Littleton, and my arrangement with my wife at the time was that she'd give me 2 years to do whatever I wanted, and I'd give her 2 years. So I considered those 2 years my sadhana. And I went out, and there was a huge field, acres and acres, hundreds of acres of field behind the house where we lived. And I went out, and most of the day I sat. Could be a blizzard, could be a hurricane. Most of the day I sat outside in nature, and that way, but sitting, proper sitting in a way, but at the same time feeling nature. So when I had to go back to the city and support my wife, and I felt that I lost something tremendous, and I longed for it. And I came back to Littleton a few times, the actual field, which is now a suburb where it was, and just burst into tears. My longing was so great, and I felt so much that I'd lost something. So when I came back here, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, which was that I wanted to absolutely live in nature in a samadhi-like space, and that's you're in those moments, moment by moment, but very concentrated, so that nature, you're really welcoming it as your teacher. And so I don't know that it was a surprise so much as just a great delight.
What were some of the other delights that showed up for you? Maybe moments that you caught on film or or critters that you may have encountered during your time. There must have been some wonderful moments that showed up for you.
Well, it was really interesting. The practice that I took was one of moments, of course. And what I was most interested in, and I've taught this occasionally as a creative practice for my students, what I was most interested in was capturing the most extraordinary moment or moments I'd experienced during the day. A lot of time we kind of dumb down our education to what is the lowest common denominator. And I thought, no, that isn't right. And William Blake was a great teacher of this. And I thought, no, what I want to do, I want to capture and hopefully at some point use this to inspire people, the very best moments, the most extraordinary moments. So I think what I captured a lot in that poetry were the kind of the hero's journey of moving from a place where your ego is still caught, whether you're scrolling or you're thinking of that text you didn't complete or whatever it was, and you're deepening in spite of that and through it. And sometimes it's a very emotional practice of moving through those feelings and coming to the bare sensations that are their essence. And then finding in that essence um, the sound of the wind or the plop of a turtle falling into the water, and realizing that those feelings are just pools of experience as pure, as direct as that plop of the turtle into the water.
Yeah, beautifully said. Now let's shift direction just a little bit. I know you have another book that you want to talk about for a bit. Maybe you can say what that is and what it's about, why it's special to you.
Yeah, I've written maybe a dozen books now. I've lost count, but and since I was known in the world of money, I wrote three or four of them on money. And but meditation is there in every one of them. And what happened, oh, 15 years ago, when we had the banking crisis, I took it very personally. I'd been training advisors for many years, and I thought, how could this world that I was attempting to make a better place fall into a place that is so disastrous for so many people? So I wrote a book called A Golden Civilization and the Map of Mindfulness. And please do look up the map of mindfulness. It's a pretty cool map. It's basically this notion that the present moment is really what life is really all about, and time and space is a minor thing in relation to the present moment. So how do you map that? But what happened with that was I'd gone on a world tour, and my hunch was that people everywhere wanted the same thing, and so I couldn't understand why we were blocking it. So at the end of that tour, well, it wasn't really over, and then COVID hit. I got one of the earliest cases and a terrible case of COVID, and I got long COVID from it, and I'm still fatigued from it. I still carry it. But what it did, all the meditations we do on death, right? What it did was it inspired me to get to work and to finish those 5 books of poetry and photography. And then to come back to this question of civilization and look at it seriously and try to come up with something, which I think I have, that would shift everything. And what I've come up with is actually a single sentence piece of legislation that I think would solve pretty much all of the structural things that have gone wrong certainly over the last several decades. So the book that I wrote is, I think of it as the main teaching that I give when I teach is the Eightfold Path, and I give it again and again. I've given it for 40 years, and I've done it. It's always different, right? And hopefully you're deepening as you do it. And I think of this is the 3 domains of freedom. And the subtitle says it all. Each moment is yours. Well, that's what you and I are talking about. That's mindfulness. Each moment is yours. That's a domain of freedom. The second domain is your life is yours. And that's what I taught financial advisors. I taught them about kind of the hero's journey that people are on, and taught them that if they inspired people to live for what they felt was the most profound, most meaningful life they could live, that they could actually make that happen for people. So now there's thousands of people who have studied this technique and are executing it with their clients. So your life is yours is the second domain of freedom. And the third domain I took this risk with, it says civilization is yours. And we go back, you go back to our original thinking about democracy and where we thought, civilization is ours. But we've lost some of that in the last few decades. And I thought, no, let's go back to it. This is really important. Civilization is who we are as a species. This is why it relates to the Eightfold Path. It relates to right speech, right action, and right livelihood. As democracy blossomed into the world, part of our livelihood became citizens. What do we do in democracy? That's part of our livelihood. And so what I do in the book is I inspire people to live more with the freedom that is there, but then to take these freedoms and go out the area where we find that freedom is not happening and make it happen. And could I give my single sentence piece of legislation? I mean, I won't give it exactly, but the notion is we could pass a single sentence and it would change everything. And what it does is that it addresses the institutional habit of getting into places where we've got global warming, we've got a diminution of democracy, we've got these challenges about truth, where you have the media, is this true or is this true? Or am I telling the truth or are you telling the truth? So the single sentence is something like this, that it would require every institution, every corporation, nonprofit, and government to place the truth, democracy, the planet Earth, and humanity ahead of their own self-interest. And I think that would really solve just about everything. That would be a whole new world. But I mean, can you imagine how is it that we set up something where we allow these huge hierarchies of power to borrow all this money, have all this media power, and get into our election and take away our democracy from it or burn up the earth? How did we allow it? And it's a very simple thing to have it right at the base. When you incorporate, this is part of the trade-off. You get incorporation and get all those things, but the planet, humanity, gets a humane institution that puts its humaneness ahead of its own self-interest.
Thank you so much for that. And any parting insights or inspiration for the viewers?
The 5-book series you can find on a subscription basis, and some of it for free at georgekinder.com, and this other one you can find on Amazon. 3 Domains of Freedom you can find on Amazon. No, but it's been wonderful to be here. I think I was interviewed once by Buddha Door Global, I think it was, and a pretty wonderful interview when I was in Hong Kong and the students were marching. And I just couldn't help myself. I was there to give workshops, and I'd stop the workshops and I'd go out and talk to the students in the street because I was so blown away by it. After that, this is only the second interview I've given to a Buddhist or mindfulness community. So, Ted, I have great thanks for you and for your audience. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much. And for those who are watching or listening, I'll have some links for you where links can be found on this. Our guest today, George Kinder. George, thanks so much for being here. Really good to talk with you today.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you so much for being here today. And I hope you got something out of our discussion and exploration of being mindfully present in nature. Remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you next time on Mindfulness Voyage.